All right, good morning, everyone. Everybody looks awake, sort of. Welcome to the General Caucus. My name is Bryce Bernard. I'm currently the chair of the NEC, and I'll just be moderating this conversation that we have today. So here's our goal for today. We're going to walk through each of the pieces of legislation, and this is a chance for people to advocate, to explain, to describe what the legislation is about, and have a conversation in here with everybody. The rest of today, there are a lot of individual caucuses for ADs and conferences to have a more in-depth conversation about the legislation. So we're just gonna walk through it. If you have a statement you'd like to make, a question you'd like to raise about it, Chesney and I may not have the answers, but we will try. Please come to the microphone, identify who you are and your school or your conference, and then we'll work from there. So let's move to number one. We have no constitutional amendments this year, so bylaw amendment number one puts beach volleyball on the map. This beach volleyball's in there, will be in their second year of invitational status. This bylaw puts all of the regulations in place for frequency of play, and they match pretty much men's volleyball in the spring. Any questions? This is going to be a quick meeting. All right, let's move to number two. Number two.
And Bryce, before
yes.
you keep going, just for anybody who's maybe following along, you can access all of the legislation from your app in the convention legislation as well as the FAQs documents as we go here.
Bylaw amendment number two changes the start date for golf from the fourth Thursday in August to the fourth Monday in August. Do we have any questions? All right. Bylaw amendment number three creates a frequency of play exception for conferences who hold their qualifying conference championships in the fall for a spring sport or a winter sport. Do we have any comments, questions? All right, moving on. This is going to be quick, I think. Bylaw amendment number four, declaration of intent submissions. Currently, all of our declarations of intent are due on April 1st. This would push that deadline back to June 1st. Any questions, comments? You would be allowed to submit anytime from April 1st to June 1st.
Yeah, Scott, the question was just making sure that you could revise if you first submit, April 1st. Would you have the opportunity to revise up till June 1? And you would. We would probably have to work with you at the national office to sort of unlock your declaration submission. But yes, the real deadline would be June 1, and then we would take all of those responses and begin to work with the National Administrative Council on creating the qualification plans and those sorts of things.
Any other questions? All right, bylaw amendment number five. This creates a grace period for affiliated conference or the Continental Association if their membership drops below 5 schools. This is not a per sport issue. This is if the conference drops below 5 and creates a 2-year grace period to maintain their first AQ, not any additional AQs. And we have a question or a comment.
Yep, this is Matt with Montana Tech. It's actually, I believe, for conferences to drop below 6 and not 5.
Yeah, you're right.
And the intent behind this legislation is to help promote and provide some stability for the association, the conferences, and most importantly, the student athletes that have made decisions on where they're going to school and where they're competing. And it also would be legislation that's already in place in the NCAA, so that it just helps promote stability as we get through some unstable times.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Chris Walger, Director of Athletics, Kaiser University. I'm kind of torn on this one because I do understand your point on if a conference drops, it does affect the student athletes. But at the same time, I've sat in probably 3 different sessions where we've talked about the weakness of the NCAA, pulling members over. To me, when we're passing legislation like this, it doesn't make us stronger, in my opinion. I think if a conference drops below 5, instead of leniency, we put urgency. We try to get them back up. But I don't know that this helps strengthen the association on that side. I don't know that it helps keep members or retain them or get new ones. Again, I would say it's probably better that we have different strategies to get that conference back up, but to allow them a 2-year grace period, just to me doesn't make a lot of sense. They still have a path for championships. They can still earn their way in and get a at-large bid. So I would be against it, and I'd encourage you to vote against it as well. Thank you.
Charlie Gross, Carroll College. It's not about protecting the automatic qualifying bid. It's about keeping the integrity of the conference and giving a 2-year period to strategize exactly how to protect the student athlete and being proactive rather than reactive at the time when you need a period of time to be able to make good decisions rather than quick decisions that may not be in the best interest of the conference.
Thank you. Other comments?
Eric Ward, Mid-South Conference Commissioner, and right now I'm just speaking as the chair of the National Administrative Council. NAC not frequently, but occasionally receives requests for exceptions from conferences when they do have membership issues that cause them to drop below the requisite 6 members to receive the first AQ. And typically, those requests are granted by NAC to give them some time to try to find another member or 2 to get back to that magic number of 6. So in essence, this legislation sort of formalizes things that have happened in the past and will likely happen again in the future if we're to see those kinds of situations occur with membership. So it's not unusual.
Other questions, comments? All right, let's move on to bylaw change number 6. This clarifies the National Conduct and Ethics Committee and clarifies what they have the ability to be able to act on, to be able to modify suspensions and other penalties that are assessed. Do we have any questions?
Scott Crawford with the KCAC. Couple quick questions. Do we have any examples of which sports this would actually apply to? Because it's not referenced in the material. Because it's my understanding this is only for sports that do not carry a required suspension with an accompanying ejection.
Yeah, so Scott, this could apply to essentially any sport, and we have a more specific rubric that goes through sport by sport, how all of the various possible suspensions play out. So this could apply in any sport where there is the possibility of an NAIA required suspension being more than what the sport rule would require. So I think as commissioners, you guys have worked with Bob Lade, our director of officiating, on rubrics and things that kind of work through every sport, how that looks. So this would apply to any of those sports, potentially, where If that NAIA rule requires a more heavy suspension, then the institution can appeal that suspension to the Conduct and Ethics Committee. So then in those cases, this legislation would impact what the Conduct and Ethics Committee could do in their review of the appeal.
Okay, that's a good clarification. We were told a little bit differently in the CCA meeting, that it would apply only to sports that carried, that didn't have a required suspension as part of the rule. So I appreciate that clarification. And if this does pass, I'd like to make sure that that box is added to that chart that Bob has created. That would be very helpful. Thank you.
Gotcha.
Drew Watson, Southeastern University, member of Conduct and Ethics. Just to clarify, the reason that this bylaw is coming forward is because many times we'll get an appeal on a suspension. We'll get the video of the incident sent in, and we'll look at it and go, man, that for what happened, the fighting penalty is just too much. So we'd like to reduce it, but we don't have the power within the bylaw to do so. So it doesn't happen much, but just to give us this flexibility so that a student athlete is not unduly penalized and sitting out longer than we feel they have to. Thank you.
Any other comments? All right, let's move on to number 7. Number 7 changes the composition of the members on the Conduct and Ethics Committee. This adds an additional FAR and 1 member from the Athletic Compliance Administrators Association. Do we have any questions, comments? All right, on to number 8. This changes the composition of the Competitive Experience Committee. This adds an additional athletics director and an additional new member from the Athletic Compliance Administrators Association. Any questions, comments? All right, let's move on to number 9. This bylaw changes the composition of the National Eligibility Committee. In this case, the National Eligibility Committee is not expanding its membership. It reduces the committee from 1 FAR eligibility chair and adds a member from the Athletic Compliance Administrators Association. Do we have any questions or comments? And our last one, number 10. This changes the composition of the NAIA Rise Committee and adds an additional athletic compliance officer to that committee. Any questions or comments? All right. So the rest of today, and I believe tomorrow morning, there are opportunities for all of us to interact with our conferences, with our various constituent groups, to discuss these things further and to take straw polls. Tomorrow, when we come back to the general session to vote, the results of all of the straw polls will be available so that you can see how each of our constituent groups voted. Anything you need to add?
Nope.
Then we will call this meeting adjourned. And we're back in here, I believe, at 9:15. Thank you.